Welcome, everyone. We're thrilled to have you here with us this evening for an evening where we're going to talk about global collaborations in science and technology. My name is Juan de Pablo, and I am the Executive Vice President for Science and National Laboratories at the University of Chicago. Before I introduce our panelists, I wanted to take a moment to remind you that this is part of the launch of the CNRS University of Chicago International Research Center for Discovery, or IRC Discovery. This is a very exciting initiative for us because it brings together UChicago's field-defining work with the scope and multidisciplinarity of the French National Center for Scientific Research, or CNRS. There is more information about the IRC Discovery on the back of your programs, and I encourage you to sign up for email so that you can actually become part of this community that is going to be doing all this work together in collaboration with our friends in France. Now, my staff are permanently upset with me because I veer off the remarks. I never say what I'm supposed to do. And they found a way of controlling that, which is they made a video of me reading what I'm supposed to say, and now they're going to play it. I'm very sorry about that. I hate watching myself on a video. I tend to be, I'm a shy person. So bear with me, 2 minutes of video, and then we're going to have our panel, okay? To tackle the world's most pressing issues, collaboration across scientific boundaries is crucial. Collaborations across nations and continents are also critical. It takes many perspectives and infrastructure at scale to find viable solutions and create real global impact. That is why the University of Chicago is proud to partner with the French National Center for Scientific Research, or CNRS, on a joint research center. The CNRS UChicago International Research Center for Fundamental Scientific Discovery, or IRC Discovery, brings together two of the world's leading research institutions to expand the impact of our creativity, to increase our knowledge, and to disseminate our discoveries. The CNRS is Europe's largest fundamental scientific agency, internationally recognized for its excellence in research. University of Chicago is a world-renowned education and research institution with a history of shaping and defining fields of research. For years, UChicago and CNRS scholars have worked together on research topics from astrophysics and biochemistry to the digital humanities and philosophy. The creation of the IRC Discovery further validates the importance of this partnership, as well as the university's ongoing investments in collaborations with France. IRC Discovery presents a unique opportunity to bring together the scope and multidisciplinarity of the CNRS with UChicago's rigorous approach to developing answers to some of the world's fundamental scientific questions. It will identify big challenges, accelerate progress, and bring new ideas to life. This is discovery on a global scale. Thank you very much. How about that accent? That was lovely, a good touch of. All right. So it is now my pleasure to invite our panelists for this evening up onto the stage, and I will provide a brief introduction. Jerry, you want to come up, and Antoine and Paul? All right. So I'll start with Jerry here. Jerry Richmond is the Undersecretary for Science and Innovation for the U.S. Department of Energy. She leads the DOE's Office for Science, which is the nation's largest federal sponsor of basic research. We don't often remember or appreciate this. DOE's Office of Science is the nation's largest federal sponsor of basic research in the physical sciences. They do research in development in nuclear, fossil, and renewable energy, and of course the national laboratories and their families.
Jerry is a chemist whose research examines the chemistry and physics that occur at complex surfaces that have relevance to important problems in energy production, environmental remediation, and atmospheric chemistry. Welcome, Jerry. We're so happy to have you here.
Glad to be here in Chicago.
Thank you. Next, we have our friend Antoine Petit from France. He's the chairman and CEO of the French National Center for Scientific Research, and he leads CNRS's scientific, administrative, and financial management. Antoine is a distinguished computer scientist who specializes in formal methods for the specification and verification of parallel systems in real time, and has held many scientific leadership positions in the French Ministry of Research and other organizations. Welcome, Antoine.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Paul Alivisatos, who is the president of the University of Chicago. He's a celebrated chemist who has made many research breakthroughs in the field of nanocrystals, and his inventions are now widely used in biomedical devices or TV displays, amongst other applications. Before coming to the University of Chicago in 2021, he was a faculty member and senior administrator at UC Berkeley for over 30 years. Thank you very much for joining us today in this conversation. And by way of introduction, what I'd like to do is perhaps say a few words about what you do. Antoine, maybe we can start with you. You are the chairman and CEO of CNRS. What is the mission of CNRS, and what does it do in service of that mission?
Yes, thank you very much. So perhaps, yes, some words about CNRS. So CNRS has been created the 19th of October, 1939. And so if you are a fan of history, it was some weeks after France declared war to Germany. And so we can say, why did France decide to create a scientific research institution some weeks after the war? And the idea is that science will be needed to face this conflict. We know the history after. So from the very beginning, the role of CNRS was to make things for the benefit of society. But what we do basic research. But what is interesting that, as I said, from the very beginning, there is this idea that basic research is useful for society. I think that all of us are now convinced of that. But I think that at this time, it was not so obvious. And it's mainly due to two fantastic guys. Jean Perrin was Nobel Prize of Physics in 1926, and Jean Zay, who was a minister of national education, and he is the creator of CNRS, which is already not so bad, but also from the Festival de Cannes, that you probably know for movies. And unfortunately, he died at the age of 40. He was murdered by the milice from Vichy. And our two founders are now at the Panthéon, and so we are quite proud of that. So what do we do now 80 years after, 83 years after? Still the same thing. We do basic research in all fields of science, including humanities and social science. CNRS is quite a big institution. We employ 32,000 people, among which 28,000 scientists, once again in all fields of science. And clearly, we have a strong policy of international cooperations, and we will discuss this. And just one word about the fact that we work for the benefit of society. Our three main targets, if I say, are first social challenges, big social challenges that we all face together. Also the economic world, in sense that we create, for instance, between 80 and 100 spin-offs every year. We work also a lot with industrial partners. I can discuss that in details further. And also, what is very important for us is that we are convinced that science is needed by citizens and by politicians. So we try to give knowledge and to them. We don't want to decide for the politicians. It's not our work, but we have to bring them knowledge and also to bring knowledge to citizens. And I think that all the crises we have faced and we still face show that this knowledge is really crucial for people.
Thank you, Anna. And like to continue with you, Jerry. You are the Undersecretary for Science and Innovation at the DOE. For the benefit of our audience, could you tell us what your role entails and what the DOE really does for science for the nation?
Well, that's a big question.
A little bit of what you do.
That's right. So in my position, I oversee the, one you referred to it before, the physical sciences, but also fusion and high energy physics and basic energy sciences, which has material science and chemistry and physics and the BER, biological and environmental research, and computational. We call that OSCAR. OSCAR is all the computational areas. Really, the discovery science, and I've forgotten someone, nuclear too, but it's just the beautiful discovery science that is, it's purely discovery science, but it also has a bit of a mission to it too, because we are a mission-associated agency, and so we call it use-inspired research, especially as it applies to energy. And so the Office of Science has 27 user facilities at all the different national laboratories that are open to companies and students all over the world, light sources and so forth. So that's the Office of Science side. That's about $8 or $9 billion funding. And then there's the applied energy side, which is Office of Electricity, so it's grid issues. It's really taking that basic science and taking it in an application, and in some respects into then putting together projects which can actually test out, demonstration projects. So it's a combination of the applied science and also demonstrating that to de-risk if companies want to take it on. So that would be Office of Electricity, nuclear energy. EERE is about energy efficiency and resources, and so that's a broad portfolio of solar and wind and batteries and everything having to do with renewable energy. And then and nuclear energy, there's a lot in that going on right now too. And I'm fossil energy, but it's really carbon management now. And so then 14 of the and so that encompasses funding at all the 17 laboratories, but I oversee 14 of those 17 laboratories. The other 3 are the National Nuclear Security. And so in my position, especially with the issue of, so I took this position, first of all, I was very honored to be asked by President Biden to do it. And I took this position because I could see that this is really a critical time for this country to take very seriously climate change. And this is the reason for taking it on, and this is the reason for looking to see how we can take the very important discovery science, take it over to the applied areas, and now with the reorganization of the Office of Science to have deployment too, it's really to be able to take that arc from discovery to deployment in a way we've never been able to do before. And so my job is really to make sure that we reduce this impedance mismatch between divisions, between these sections of Department of Energy, and make sure that we, whatever's made for new batteries, that discoveries that are made for new cathodes or anodes, that we start demonstrating that they can work and then take it on to deployment. So my job is really to try to integrate all this science together in ways that's really never been done before. And let me say something else that's never been done before is how tightly these 14 laboratories are tied to NNSA, the National Security, Nuclear Security, because we are Jill Ruby, who's Undersecretary for Nuclear Energy. I say sits on this side because in the hallway she does. We are tightly tied in everything having to do with the things that they do as well as what we do, and then on to the Acting Undersecretary Kathleen Hogan, who has all the deployment. So that's my day job. That's my day job.
Yeah. All right, understood. Paul, I think most of the people in the audience are familiar with the University of Chicago, but they may not be so familiar with some of the strategic initiatives that you see the university undertaking in the years to come. Can you tell us a little bit more about where you want to take the university?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me say what a privilege it is for the university. It's a place that's built around the idea of wanting to be a home for creation of new knowledge, for really creating new ideas, but to do that in the service of society. That's really the essence of what the university is about. And so what we see at this moment, and to add to that, let me just say a couple other things about it. One of the things that is a deep emphasis in our university, you mentioned all the full spectrum, you also mentioned the full spectrum of what you have. I think one of the really essential points of a university is to foster this concept of the unity of knowledge, how all the different parts can reinforce and help each other to advance. And we take that very seriously. But I will say that we are in this moment in time where the most important problems for discovery and the most important problems for impact on society are ones that are very deep, really difficult ones, and they require a mindset of partnership and collaboration. And so we're talking about areas that are as differentiated as thinking about the issues of climate and energy that you were just describing, and which are, in our case, for example, at the university, will encompass everything. We're here in the Booth School, everything from economics, markets, and policy to potentially applied geophysics and areas, of course, of energy, technology, and education. So they're very broad area like climate and energy. We're deeply engaged in, and that's one of the major new initiatives that we're thinking about. But we also have areas like computation, data science, and artificial intelligence, where we see that a university that's built on the ideas of wanting to always be using evidence and reason and rigor. It's a methodological change in how to learn all of a sudden, how to learn in almost any subject. That cuts across all of our disciplines, but it will be a very deep part of the interactions that we're talking about here with the CNRS and, of course, with our deep partnerships with the national laboratories. I suspect, Juan, we're going to have a longer discussion about quantum information, science and technology, which is an area of enormous focus for us. So those are some of the areas, of course, of healing, health, biosciences, biotechnology are areas of enormous growth and discovery. And then I'm really glad that you mentioned earlier the humanities and the social sciences. I think in this world we're going to be talking mostly here about the really hard science problems, the ones that require working at scale and so on. But we need to be thinking all the time deeply about what it means to be human in this era of change. What are the foundational values that we bring to these discussions? How do we organize ourselves in terms of policies? And I'll also just say we are embedded deeply in the city of Chicago, and we care deeply about its health. So our role as a anchor institution on the south side of Chicago plays an important role in this city, and I'm very conscious of the role that we play in that sense, which I think also will help us ultimately to help our society to bridge some of the challenges that we have with respect to inequality and other issues of representation that are very important. So we have a wide range of roles here, but we're deeply committed to the notion that partnering with other institutions globally and also with organizations like all of the national laboratories, other universities, and so on, and corporates. We're going to probably talk about all those things. That the university of today needs to be a very porous place, that people, institutions, and partnerships can come in and out, that we can create environments that are flexible, so that we can be able to really bring the very best that we have to the urgent problems.
So let's talk a little bit about the global partnerships, and perhaps I'll start with you, Antoine. And what are some examples of the partnerships that the CNRS has and what are some of the problems that you partner with, because you cannot solve them alone with the CNRS people.
I think that there is no problem that we can solve alone.
Good answer.
No, it's particularly true for a country like France. We were, an old country, but not a so big country. We are 70 million of inhabitants, and we cannot think that we will face all the scientific problems alone. You know, there is an African proverb which says that alone you go faster, and together you go farther. And I think that science the idea is to go deeper and deeper and farther and farther. So we really need this cooperation. It's true inside Europe, of course, but it's also true between Europe and other parts of the world. And it's true, as Paul mentioned already, between disciplines. And so clearly, the fact to have a strong, proactive international policy is really part of our job at CNRS. We want to construct these networks. We want to have mobility between researchers. And that's why partnerships are so important. And that's also why we decided to launch this new object for CNRS, which is these centers. We have very few centers, only 4 until now. One with University of Arizona, one with University of Tokyo, one with Imperial College in London, and so this one with University of Chicago. And we do not plan to have a lot, because clearly I think we have to go further than individual relations. These relations are important, of course, but if we want to construct on a long-term perspective, that's very important to have these partnerships. And also, it has been already been said, but I think it's very important that to have different disciplines all together. It does not mean that all subjects will be treated by all disciplines, but now I think there are very few subjects that can be treated with only one discipline. And so we have to share this knowledge, we have to share these techniques, we have to share these facilities. If I say a word about our relation with DOE, we are organized in CNRS in 10 divisions and one in particle physics, and we have very strong relation with DOE for years now. And I think that's the idea that DOE and US have, of course, very smart researchers. We still do, but they have to cooperate, and that's key today, more than ever probably.
And Jerry, could you perhaps give us also a few examples of how the DOE partners on large problems with other countries?
Well, we're in the neighborhood for this, certainly with Fermilab here with LBNF Dune. We have the director here in our midst, and the fact that this involves over 30 different countries to really understand the most fundamental particles that make up our universe. And it's the largest megascale project in this country. Isn't that right, Leah? Yeah, it is. I mean, she could brag on forever and ever, but I'm going to brag for her. But what this is it really has brought together a lot of different countries, some countries that just don't have the resources to be able to put together something like this on their own, but they want to be part of it, and they have the people that can really bring new insights, bring the kind of new ideas and ways to do the research that is so important from the different countries, because everyone has a different perspective. So I think that's just a wonderful example. And many of our laboratories have lots of international projects going on, but I think since we're here in Chicago, this is the one that I particularly want to highlight. But many of our high energy physics projects that are going on in different laboratories, whether it be at Brookhaven, for example, are really the ones that have very strong international ties, also with RIC and EIC. So I think it all comes together because there's an exciting idea, and if your country is the nucleus for that idea and can provide at least the catalyst to get it started, then they will come. I believe they will come. And I think that's a good example too with CERN, right? They've come, CERN in France. It's a magnet for if you're a student in this area, you want to go work at CERN. And they'll want to kind of work at LBNF Dune too. Because it's anyway, I could stop.
So on this issue of global partnerships, Paul, the University of Chicago has 5 campuses all over the world. Can you tell us a little bit about how you think about these campuses, what they do to students, to the university, and then how you prioritize or identify regions where you want to develop these further?
Well, first of all, let me say that the global campuses that we have are really transformational for the university. They're very, very important. And the one that, of course, I can't tell you what a marvelous set of synergies are going on right now. The flagship center for us is the one in Paris. It's the model. It is. It started initially as a relatively small center, which is a good way to start things, because then we could see, how does it really work? And what has emerged in this case that's so fascinating is that it's become a critical element both for our teaching, for our instruction, and for research. And so in this case, we have the possibility, the way that we do it is if we have a student that's there for a quarter, they'll take three-week mini quarters in which in each one of those 3-week segments, there's only one class they take. They do essentially that whole course, the quarter's worth of course in that 3-week period taught by one of our faculty. And it's become a very deep, rich place. It's very successful. People, students and faculty really gain an enormous amount from doing that. And now we're in the middle of the construction of a new campus there that's going to be of substantial size. Now, that, if you take that paired now with the partnership with CNRS, where we've got faculty from across the university, from all the different disciplines now partnering with colleagues in the CNRS, you can see how these things reinforce each other and they create really something that's absolutely extraordinary. As you say, we do have centers in Beijing, in Delhi, in Hong Kong, and in London, and each one of those has their own story behind them and the role that they're playing. But they're all critical. I will call out, for example, specifically in the Beijing and New Delhi examples, we've talked a little bit about how important it is for the university to try to be at the forefront of climate and energy. Well, what happens in those countries is going to determine so much of what's going to happen with regards to climate and energy. We need to be there. We need to be in the conversation. We have to be in a dialogue and also understanding and working together on problems. So those centers have important focal points in those areas. You're a very busy person, so I know that you're out there thinking about where the University of Chicago might have centers in the future, and we're giving those some serious thought. But I think what's so interesting is that today it would be almost impossible to imagine a University of Chicago that did not have centers like this around the world. It would be such a loss of the dialogue and interaction that we wouldn't be the same university without it. And I also hope that the partner institutions that are out there in the world that we engage with are feeling the same way, that having us present there is making an important difference for them.
So along the same lines, both Jerry and Antoine, how do you think about the areas where you want to invest next? How you do identify partners and problems? And how do you take geopolitical considerations into account? Because there's things that we cannot do anymore that we were able to do before. Difficult questions.
Antoine, I thought he pointed at you first.
Oh, sure. Well, there are two parts in your questions. First one, I think that clearly we can sign all the agreements with Paul. At the end of the day, if our researchers do not want to collaborate together, it's useless. So clearly this is a key point. And that's also why when we started discussions, we started off what we already did with you and we know that we had already a lot of common co-publications, almost more than several hundreds per year, something like 700 or 800 per year. And so clearly we had already collaboration. And I think that the fact that we give the sign to our researchers, that our scientists, that we are ready to go further, clearly we have attracted a lot of people, and I came with quite a big French delegation, and people are happy to cooperate, but that's the key point. We cannot force scientists, and that's lucky from my point of view. That's clearly and we all know that scientists cooperate with the scientists they respect, and I think that excellence attracts excellence, and so we have the ambitions to be among the excellent institutions. University of Chicago is clearly one excellent institution, and so it was natural to have this cooperation. But I think the two ingredients are needed, and also clearly our willingness, and it's for political reasons. For what you geopolitical reasons, that's complicated. I would like to say that there is no borders for science, but unfortunately, we know that it is not true anymore. For instance, in Europe and in France in particular, we had very strong cooperation with Russia until recently, and we stopped all these relations, at least at the institutional level. There are still individual relations, and I think it's good because we can hope that things will change in Russia, and to have kept these individual relations is important from point of view. Nevertheless, from an institutional point of view, we have stopped this relation. US and France, or US and Europe do not have exactly the same positions regarding China, but it's also an issue. And I don't think that we can imagine fundamental science completely separated with one European fundamental science, one Asian fundamental science area. That's complicated. We have to find the right balance without being naive, and that's so. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, very good answer. Actually, you finessed that very elegantly. Jerry, how do you think about new regions where you want to invest in new partnerships?
Well, I think I'm going to focus on the Office of Science in particular, and I think. In terms of what kind of discovery science we would invest in, each of the different parts of the Office of Science, they have a process in which they develop what their priorities are. And I must say that physics is an interesting case because physics tends to, in their priorities, they oftentimes think more international than some of the other areas do. And I think it's because a lot of the tools require a lot of investment, and they require, and that requires an international community. But also, all of these things, all these areas of physics, whether it be particle physics or even going into fusion or other areas, again, you got to have a community, you got to have a village to make that happen. And when we have these studies in each of the Office of Science areas, they come up with priorities. A lot of times those mesh well, especially in physics, with international collaborations. And I think in a lot of the other areas, the priorities that are set, the ones that clearly have international resonance, grow up also. So I think it's really in some fields, it's scientist to scientist connections that suddenly you've got a big group of international folks working in an environmental topic such as water. And so that then raises its visibility to us to take it on more as a priority. But it really comes from both the top, because Congress says we're going to have a lot of money here and we're looking forward, and we understand that international collaborations are important. Then we might go that direction, but we also see it kind of holistically. But I would agree, Paul, completely that MOUs can be a dime a dozen. Right? You can sign all the MOUs you want. But if you don't have the people-to-people connection and the same kind of shared passion for a particular project, it's not going to go. It's not going to go. So we look for that synergy as much as we can, where the international component is key to making progress, more so than others would.
Thank you, Jerry. I'd like to shift topics a little bit and talk about the role of corporate partners, industry, in some of these large global research projects that we're pursuing. For example, in areas such as quantum or AI, one could argue that some of the more exciting work is happening at companies like, well, I don't need to name them, but large companies. So how do you think about those three-way partnerships, academia, government, and the private sector? Paul, maybe you want to start.
Let me jump in
really
since we've been heavily involved in that recently, in particular with quantum. So, I mean, let's take that as a good test case. As people here will know, it's been the work of scientists for a long time to try to understand the quantum world and then slowly but surely to gain control over it, to be able to create quantum systems that can be controlled, their phases adjusted, and then used for various applications, whether it's sensing or communications or computing. And this has gotten better and better. And so for us, our faculties, for example, and I'm looking here at Matt Terrell, who helped foster the creation of a large faculty in our university, thinking about this in a core kind of way. We got stronger at it over time. As the area matured, it also coupled very, very strongly with what's going on at Argonne and at Fermilab. There are very deep connections there because they each have areas of expertise, some of which are quite surprising. For example, finding that the RF cavity could be used as a cavity to sharpen a superconducting qubit and make its Q much higher. A very unexpected but extraordinary kind of example of how these things occur. So here we've got this very rich environment. But to go to the next stage, oh my golly, that's such a complicated and difficult thing to do. It requires levels of integration that will really surpass those of a university. And so we're so lucky that we were able to start this dialogue around partnerships with IBM and Google, facilitated in this case a little bit by what's happening in the geopolitical world and the fact that the US and Japan are looking to build stronger partnerships. So we have then the University of Tokyo, already an academic partner, coming together with us, with IBM and with Google. The four came together and we said, let's do a large-scale partnership. In the case of IBM, $100 million investment to explore the creation. What would it take to get to the point of a 100,000 qubit supercomputer embedded in a supercomputer? Who knows? Perhaps that will be the next one at Argonne. I could imagine that being the case in 10 years. And with Google getting together to think about how we can expand the workforce for quantum and also how we can use the sort of hundreds of qubit kind of computers that exist today. What's so fascinating about this is it immediately connects the two universities, Tokyo and U Chicago. It brings in these two incredible companies. The labs, of course, are going to be ultimately deeply involved in this. And then sitting here, and it turns out that one of only 4 global partnerships for CNRS is the University of Tokyo. I mean, this is clearly going to emerge as a key cooperation point with the CNRS. And I think what it points out is that these things, as they grow from the bottom up, if they go well, they keep gaining momentum, and then they become platforms that we can build things up at larger scale. And the best universities will be ones that have their eye on being able to do that in a few strategic cases. The universities that get good at doing that, they're going to be at the forefront.
And perhaps, Jerry, one of the things that you've done at the DOE is really help change the culture and think a lot more about innovation and partnerships. What are some of the approaches that you're taking to create these large-scale partnerships with the corporate sector?
Well, a number of different ways that are really coming to fruition now, and that's certainly the Exascales Computing Project, which NVIDIA was central to, being able to develop some of the components for that, but also working with other IBM and others with regards to really bringing up exascale computing so that we could be the first in the world to reach the level of exascale. And so bringing in, because we couldn't do it alone, but they also win, the corporations or companies also win because we're doing the really fundamental kind of work with development of algorithms and so forth that they just can't do. So it's really a win-win situation in that case. In the area of microelectronics, you know, our user facilities are a fantastic example of how there could not have been able to do the advances. I don't call it microelectronics anymore, I call it nanoelectronics, but you have to be in a scientific community to talk that way. Because you had to get down to a nanoscale and be able to figure out what your pattern looked like on your chip at that level. And you had to have a light source to do that. You had to have an X-ray light source, whether it be at Argonne or Berkeley. And so companies have come to our user facilities because they can't build these arena-size facilities themselves, or pharmaceuticals, right? I mean, if you got to have a crystal structure of pharmaceutical before you put it down the market, where are you going to get it, right? You're not going to go down anywhere but a light source, one of the DOE light sources. So you know, once you become kind of a magnet for companies to come in because they see now they can get something they can't do on their own, then it builds collaborations that go even further. So I see this as really a win-win in both cases. The companies, us winning because the companies are giving us their funding or their insights, and we give them a product that is really important and critical in many respects for what they do in their day job.
And Antoine, the CNRS was one of the early pioneers of, for example, joint laboratories between industry, CNRS, and universities. Can you tell us a little bit about how you see those partnerships as we move forward?
Yes, with pleasure. You have to understand that in France, 30 years ago, to speak of industry, startups, business, money at CNRS, it was forbidden. It was just impossible. But now things have changed during the last 30 years. And now I think we have understood the complementarity of interactions between academic world and this industry. And as you said, as I said, we create this spin-off, but we also have joint research structures with industry in which we still do basic research, we still do fundamental research, but on problems that have been defined with the industrial partner. And that's important. And one of our scientists has a very nice formula, said an industrial problem is potentially an interesting scientific question. And I think that the key point is there, that people have to know each other. And previously we spoke about the importance of scientists working together. I think relation with industries is very often the same problem. We have human relations are important, which is, I think, good, even in a digital world that we all live. These relations are key. People have to know each other. They have to understand what they can expect from the other. And we are very, very happy with these labs. And a sign that there is a snowball effect is that with the companies, our main partners, we don't have just one lab, but we have 2, 3, 5, sometimes 10 labs on different subjects, because we know each other. Once again, we know what we can expect from the other. And at the end of the day, I think we are, each of us in our role, and we speak a lot of deep tech. And in fact, what is deep tech from my point of view? It's an outstanding result at the international level, which will be transformed in innovation in a product. And I think the better the result, the fundamental result is, then the most chance you have to have a successful innovation or product.
Yep. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm getting told that I have 0 minutes to ask more questions, but now we have a few minutes for questions from the audience. So really, I would like to open it up for questions from anyone who may want to know more about what we're doing here. Yes.
Hello. It's really interesting to listen to all of you.
There's a microphone there.
Thank you. My name is Dominikos. I'm from Lithuania, a small, tiny country in the Baltics. Maybe all of you have known it, but maybe not. We're a small country, tiny. So if we would be talking about an impact, especially in terms of renewable energy, for instance, so we're new materials, but at the same time, there's old materials, old ways of making smart energy. So I heard that you are in partnerships of global cities, global countries. It's amazing. I know you can make an impact, a lot of people, a lot of access to smart people. But don't you think that entering to the small country, it's a pretty cheeky question, sorry for this, but entering to a small country as Lithuania, as you may make a bigger impact and make a front runner overall in the world. Because, yeah, Chicago is like a wind city, but Lithuania could be an energy country, just because it's easy to make an impact, easy to get collaboration with the country, to the government, to all the university bodies, and so on. So have you ever considered making global partnerships with the local players, smaller players like Lithuania, Estonia, maybe Sweden, and ever smaller countries? So that's my main question.
Does anybody want to take that?
I mean, I will say that we do have faculty partnerships with, countries everywhere, and they build up, and sometimes one of those will kind of catch and really grow. I think I definitely take your point, and I think it's a really important one. And I think that that kind of partnership, maybe the way to get that kind of partnership to really take off is to try to find an active point to build off of. And then that can really, you could be surprised at how much something like that could take off. I think it's an interesting question, and we certainly have an open mind in thinking about partnerships.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Nari Monsafavi, a Chicago entrepreneur, originally from Iran and a chemist by training. I'm wondering about templates for collaboration. If these if the scientists, who are usually tend to be sort of solitary about their approach to things and trying to implement their own experiments and ideas and verify their own theories, how could they be possibly be incented through templates to collaborate with other teams? And also, is there a role for leadership to kind of nudge people into collaboration?
Well, let me take that one, because that's really the beauty of the labs. Everything is really very much team-oriented. And that's what's unique relative to many academics' mindset as well as academic institutions. Our academic institutions have wonderful centers. Your molecular engineering center is a great example of that. But in general, the labs, you have to work as teams. And teams increasingly have been endorsed, and funding goes to teams. And we know that's our future, because as the problems have gotten so much more complex, you can't, as a chemist, chemistry isn't enough anymore. You have to be able to tie it to other areas too. So I just have to say that the labs provide a unique place for getting all of those introverts together, to talk to each other and work to each other, because a solo introvert may not make it.
Carrie, can I just say, I get the question, but I do want to say that I think that it's certainly true that, I think the stereotype of the successful scientist as being like the lone person who's by themselves doing something, and then there's lots of noise and they come out, and then suddenly the discovery's been made. I really,
wait a minute, that was Paul's career.
I really want to take deep. Yeah, it was. I want to take I want to take deep exception to it because honestly, and I would say this to any person who's beginning a career in science, is the degree to which science is a deeply social and cooperative activity is something that I think it's a huge misunderstanding in society, which actually leads a lot of people who could contribute to science to not enter it in a way that I think is very, very sad. So there's no question the labs are the exemplar because they bring large teams together. But even in the universities, there'd be very, very few examples of any progress that's being made by a single person. These things are deeply cooperative. And they're actually, the two things about it, just to add to it, one is that if you're at all competitive, which a lot of scientists are, you will join with others because you'll be more productive. It's just how it works. And the second is to never underestimate the joy that comes from people working together on discoveries, which is, just absolutely, it's palpable. I just want to make sure we get that across because it's part of the sociology of science that I think is, not appreciated enough,
If I may, in France, we strongly believe in labs. In fact, in the French system, we organize some kind of joint ventures between CNRS and French universities. And this represents something like 120,000 people, but only 1,000 labs. So you see, in average, a lab is between 100 and 120 people. So we really have, by nature, this collective organization. And I fully agree with that. You say that these labs are it's the only thing that we know. But they are key to foster collaborations and to have the good balance between the leaderships, that we need leaders, but also these leaders need teams. And either together in labs, at least in France, it works.
But I think we also need to make progress in the tenure and promotion system in this country so that you can appreciate teamwork in a tenure package rather than just the individual work. Because I think that in some universities is a problem, that you force the people into just making a name for themselves, and then you say now that you're tenured, you can explode and do collaborations, whereas it should be from day one where those collaborations are valued. So that's a question, just you have like too many answers to that.
All right. Over there, we have...
Good evening. Thank you for this interesting discussion. My name is Sarah Gate, and I'm the founder of Munitask, and I'm actually an attorney. Where I've worked is at the intersection of taking the very technical and complicated clinical research in the healthcare space and other areas as it relates to healthcare and translating that into, so getting it out of the lab door into the policy space. And so I'm curious to learn if you're thinking about it yet in your pipeline, because I know each of your organizations has lobbyists, and they go and knock at the door of various legislatures for different things. So I'm curious to learn what you believe the policy outcomes you will have. What are you trying to affect when it comes to policy or legislation? I often find in working with different scientists and different people that it's sometimes missed, but it's critical to get what you all do on the bench and otherwise out the door into policy and back into government. So I would love to hear what your take is on that and how you're thinking about it. And offer my support if you're not, and let's talk.
So with the Earth shots that we've launched, which are these decadal goals, we have 8 Earth shots now, and they really are, with regards to wind, geothermal, a whole list of them, carbon capture. All of these Earth shots have been developed with policy in mind. From the get-go, policy modeling to determine what are the goals you need to achieve in 10 years in order to make a difference in these renewable energy areas. And this is not an area that I've worked in before I took this position. I was a regular research academic person. But I get so excited when I see all of the people that I meet in the Department of Energy, many of them in the early stages of their career, that are really keen on helping develop policies that can make the science go further. And what's interesting to me, I'll just make this point, is in my field, which there's maybe 20% women, physical chemists, chemical physicists, most of the teams that I work with on policy-related issues, program development, it's about 80% women. So you go figure where these priorities, and this is just, you know, one data point in terms of this work, but I've never been in a place where I had such a diverse group of scientists that are interested in both the science as well as the policy. And I think academic institutions, if they can integrate that better, they can train students that want to go in that direction more than we do now, rather than thinking the only path to go is one, you know, bench scientist or academic. It's important.
Yeah, over here.
Good evening. My name is Vygintas, and I'm as well from Lithuania. You guys mentioned what we are from the Baltic states, but you know, we have more guys from our country because you know Arturas Karnišovas most probably, who is a basketball chief in Chicago Bulls. So we are not alone here. But what I would like to ask, actually, you mentioned Google, IBM, and we are big companies, and with a lot of bureaucracy and not so flexible. And from small companies' perspective, how we see and what is our experience that these companies are much more flexible. And for example, we have experience with universities, with researchers who are doing researches, and after that we are implementing these solutions from the software side, for example. Yeah? And how you are collaborating with the smaller companies, how you are maybe involving them, and so on. Here's my question. Thanks.
Well, I mean, so we have the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship that's a kind of gateway to foster students and faculty who want to be involved in small companies, but also as a kind of doorway for small companies to interact with the university, and a very rich set of partnerships that are really important to us. So we have a tremendous amount of that going on. As an example, the Polsky Center was the home of the first accelerator dedicated to quantum information technologies called Duality. And what is it, 18 companies now? I don't know, something like 18 companies have been supported through that. They're actually global companies. There are a couple in France. So you know, that's an example of the university being out there trying to work with small companies. And in fact, I mean, you're absolutely right about, you know, these behemoths like the IBMs and Googles are clearly making massive investments. But that's an area of technology, quantum information technologies, where who knows, there could be a new behemoth in 20 years that comes out of one of the little startups that's right here in Chicago, or came from an innovator in Lithuania. So we're right in there with you to help do that. You know, that's part of our passion.
If I may.
Yes, please, Antoine.
I was mentioning the 250 joint labs that we have with industrial partners, with companies. Only a third of them is with big companies. And roughly it's a third with big companies, a third with middle-sized companies, and more, in fact, a big third with small companies, which very often are on a niche, and they want to keep relations with the labs specialists of their subject, and so it works. In some sense, it works in the same way with small companies and big companies.
Yeah, and I would add one more thing. These accelerators that we have for companies, for example, in the quantum space, they're offered by the University of Chicago. They're subsidized by large companies like Amazon, Google, IBM. They provide the money, and they're open to startups from all over the world. And there's no catch. If we admit a company, we don't take equity in them. We just help them because we want that ecosystem to grow. So.
Should you mention chain reaction and so on too? I mean, because the labs are doing this all the time as well, right?
But we have Paul Kearns here, and I'm going to put him on the spot a little bit. But he can tell us about what Chain Reactions Innovations does for the community, really. Can somebody give the man a microphone?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Paul Kearns, Director at Argonne. Pleased to answer the question, at least in part. And we were talking about Chain Reaction Innovations, one of Department of Energy sponsored lab-embedded entrepreneurship programs. Really, we're in our 7th cohort at Argonne. Each cohort has been 5 or 6 companies, basically, again, from around the world that have clean energy technology primarily, but we've also invested in quantum technology. And that's a really fellowship program for the entrepreneur where they get to work side by side with Argonne researchers to help them de-risk their technology. Also have access to laboratory facilities, some of the unique user facilities that Undersecretary Richmond spoke of really are available for their use. And so it's really a very effective way for them to de-risk their technology. And also in partnership with that comes really business training provided by the Polsky Center through the Booth School of that's been mentioned earlier this evening. So really a fantastic program. Those companies have gone on to generate, I think it's some 640 jobs over the lifetime of the program, and I think the investment has been total from other parties has been over $75 million. So noteworthy in terms of really the early accomplishment. Undersecretary Richmond is joining us tomorrow, actually, to celebrate really what we call Demo Day. It's a program that's not only at Argonne with the Chain Reaction Innovation, but 3 other national laboratories have similar programs. We'll all be here tomorrow in this facility, really, to celebrate their accomplishments and look to raise additional venture funding for those efforts as well. So thank you for the call out and the opportunity to speak, but really fantastic program. I'm certainly willing to have additional conversation if you'd like.
Thank you, Paul.
May I ask what's chain, how do you define chain reaction?
How do we define it? I'm not quite sure how to respond to that question other than it's an incubator really intended to work with entrepreneurs and startup companies to de-risk their technology. Investment comes through the Department of Energy, depending upon really a merit selection process for those technologies, those companies. Okay.
We're going to take one last question before we have to.
Hello, I'm from Lithuania as well.
You're kidding me, right?
Somebody called me Jedi.
Let's talk about a partnership.
Okay, but I will ask a question from ChatGPT, actually.
ChatGPT?
Yeah, I just, in a way, how can business easily acquire license of valuable intellectual property rights held by University of Chicago and of those corporations? How fast we can get information about held research done?
What did ChatGPT say? Did they answer?
No, this is the question.
But I'm sure there's an answer also, right?
That would be difficult to answer.
I see. It made up the question, but not the answer. Look, let me say this, that it's certainly our goal to see that the inventions of our students and faculty find use in the world. That's that's really our focus. It's not to so we try to push things out and get them out there. I mean, how easy is it? Well, it varies enormously, probably depending on the exact invention and the circumstances around it. But we certainly spend a lot of time. You spend a lot of time on trying to make sure that we're not being particularly slow, and we try to make it easy. So that's all I can really say from a sort of philosophy point of view. I don't have numbers to share with you. Maybe you have numbers. I don't.
Yeah, lots of numbers, but I will not answer a question from GPT. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So that really brings us to the end of our program, and I want to first thank the country of Lithuania for sending so many participants. Yeah. And second, I really want to thank our participants for sharing their insights with us, and all of you for coming to this very interesting conversation. And we urge you to stay involved with the CNRS Discovery IRC, with the university, and with our partner labs, Fermilab and DOE and Argonne, as we launch and augment this venture. Thank you very much.